This is a tweet by Ezerv. Actually, he before he tweeted this, he shared some of his opinion in Tesla community group. And then I tried to ask him some questions and then just want to have some conversations like, for example, why are we comparing Amazon versus Tesla and so on, right? But I think he's still preparing his notes. And he's not free to join this morning on this session. So what I'll do is just to, just present the compilations of the data and my research. And then I'll for sure will share these presentations with him. And then let's say if he can come up with a bear thesis on Amazon, I think we will discuss that in the future sessions. I think it's always fun to exchange notes when we have bear and bull so that everyone listening in can have an assessment on whether this is a good company to invest in, right? So I'll just go through with the presentations. So the first slide, this is showing the market cap of all the big tech companies, not all the big companies, because for example, like Berkshire Hathaway, those that are not considered big tech, I removed from this chart. So as you can see, Apple, Microsoft, Google, these are definitely the big techs, right? But we also have that smaller one, for example, like TSMC, Meta, Nvidia. For Meta, I think it used to be much higher, but now dropped to lower already after the share price crash. But you look at Amazon and Tesla, yes, they are really like ranked close to each other. So Amazon is about 1.2 trillion. Tesla, after the drop, is about 700 billions market cap. I think before the drop, they used to be more like closer to each other in terms of the market cap. But I mean, there are people who are like considered new to investment, right? Just for information, the market cap, right, is just looking at the equity base, like how many shares that the companies have, the total shares multiplied by the share price. So the market cap itself will fluctuate over time. Okay, but market cap, right, is not the only thing that tell us how big is the companies, because market cap, let's say for example, investors are very bullish on a company and then they just beat the share price go up and up to like 5x, 10x, right? So the market cap will looks very big, but the scale of the business is different things, right? So that one we need to look at the fundamentals. And for the purpose of comparison, I will show a couple more, like size comparison between Amazon and Tesla. So the first one that we'll look at is revenue. So as you can see here, if we purely just compare the revenue, right, of Amazon versus Tesla, right, they are like very different. For Amazon, it's close to 500 billions, but for Tesla, it's only about like, I think for the past 12 months, right, it's only about over 70 billions. So that's the revenue comparison. I'm not saying that because the revenue is bigger, then it is better, right? Because this is just like purely just looking at the top line numbers. And we still need to understand their business, right? These are two very different business. I think I don't have to explain that, right? Because one is on e-commerce, cloud business. The other one is selling cars, energy, and so on. Then just to give you some idea, right? Like how big is this, like close to 500 billion versus 67 billions, right? So I guess most of you, like if you pay attention to Tesla, you will know that at least the guidance, right, from the management, Elon Musk also talked extensively about this, is that Tesla will grow at 50% for the foreseeable futures. So I don't think he gave a timeline on that. But at least we can say that for the next 5 years, that will be 50%. But it's not like linear 50%, right? It will be maybe slightly higher in the beginnings. Then, of course, it will slow down as the base get bigger. 67 billion is here. So if you grow it by 50% per year, right, you actually need 5 years to reach the similar amount of the revenues. So that's how big is Amazon as compared to Tesla. Okay, the next one, we look at net income. Okay, so if you compare the net income, they are pretty similar. And that's why if you look at the market cap also, okay, market cap Amazon is still bigger than Tesla. That's why we get this type of PE. But I just want to stress again that PE itself is meaningless because PE is price over earnings, right? We really need to understand, we need to break down the earnings in order to have a meaningful comparison between the two. Okay. The next one I want to show is just because when we talk about like, okay, we have the revenue and then we have the net income. Of course, if you take the net income divided by the revenue, that's what we call the margins, right? So margin, I think there are there are two different ways to look at it. The first one is the gross profit. I think this is before they deducting all the expenses that is not associated with the cost of goods sold, right? So the expenses, for example, like if you have a big fixed expenses, then you will penalize in terms of the net income. But gross profits really depends on the business model. So this is Amazon. If you look at, I think don't need to look at the gross profit. If you just look at the net income ratio, right? Their net income ratio in the early years is very negative. This is when they haven't really made profits. After that, they become positive, and then in the recent years, right, it's around 4 to 7%. This is because if you just look at the revenues, like in terms of their like close to 500 billion, right, actually most of that revenue came from the e-commerce business. And e-commerce business, right, is similar to retail, right? Which is that their margins is not a high margin business. It's not like you sell an items, you can buy it in $5 and sell it in $8 or $10, right? It's not that case. They usually charge small margins for facilitating the sales, right? So the net margin is actually quite low, and this is during normal times, okay? But if you look at longer history, right, so the top part, this is showing the gross margin, and then this is operating margin, and then this is the net margin, right? If you look at the recent futures, right, for Amazon, the net margin and the operating margin actually dropped by quite a fair bit in the recent 2 quarters. Then later we'll go through the reasons, right, why this happened, right? So now this is the numbers that we have, right, okay? For Amazon, the top line growth is only 7%. Their operating margins, right, talking about how much is their operating income divided by their revenue, only 3 margin, so low, only 3 margin. PE 108. PE of 108 for a 7% of top line growth. This one, if I ask the questions, right, like, does it make sense or not? I mean, for those who don't understand the business, right, you will look at this and think that for you're paying 108 for business that only grow at 7% and their margin is only 3%. This one is totally not a good business. So this is like, why would someone buy this business, right? So not a good business. Okay, for the sake of comparison, right, let's look at Tesla. I'm not sure whether like all of you listening are paying attention to Tesla, but I think we cover Tesla a lot. But for the sake of comparison, let's just look at their margin. For Tesla, right, their gross margin is about 25%. Okay, and this is Q2 numbers, and Q2 numbers is affected by the China Gigafactory closed down because of the COVID, so the numbers is a bit low. But Q1 and the upcoming Q3 one will be will be better. I think we'll be closer to the Q1 numbers, which is close to 30% gross margin, and the net margin is about 20%. And the net margin will we should expect the net margin to continue to grow because of now they are still at the scaling phase, right? So they are still increasing their number of cars sold by about 40 to 50% a year. So once you spread out the fixed cost, the net margin will slowly increase. Okay, this number will be higher, like 20+% should be something that we can expect, unless if they, because of the slowing down in demand, they need to cut prices, then this number will be affected. So there's a bit of like uncertainty around that. So if you look at Tesla gross margin, right, I think, let's say before 2020, that was before they scale up the Model 3 Shanghai Gigafactory and so on. After the Gigafactory in Shanghai running well, right? So the gross margin has been increasing steadily, and now about 30%. And you can look at the operating margin also slowly increase, and the net margin also increased. So for those who are bullish on Tesla, right? So the story is basically this, right? The top line will grow at about 40 to 50% every year. And then in terms of the net margin, they will continue to go up because you're spreading the fixed cost, right? So if you just assume a net margin of, let's say, 20 or 25%, top line grow at 50% for 3 or 5 years, right? Actually, you can justify a very, very high valuations, much higher than today's market cap. So this is the bull thesis for Tesla, right? But today we will not cover Tesla in details. We'll talk about Amazon. I think that's most of you come here for, right? So let's look at the overall business first, right? So overall business, I think this is a good graphic to show what Amazon business, right? So it is still an e-commerce business. If you look at the biggest source of revenue, right? This is the online store. And then there's these third-party seller services. These are actually also e-commerce. So the difference between these two is that the first one is that Amazon, they will buy from their suppliers and they will sell on Amazon e-commerce website, right? So if you buy something, let's say it's all like Amazon is the one that bought the inputs and sell it to you. So this is the revenues. And then the third-party seller services, actually these are their partners who are selling on the platforms, but they are just borrowing or renting the platform and sell on that platforms, right? So it's not like Amazon actually buy the items from them and then sell it. So there's some slight difference between the business model. The first one, for the online store, I think Amazon just take the spread between how much they buy from their supplier and then how much they sell to the buyers, right? And for the third-party seller services, actually, this is, if you just look at their revenues, right, it looks smaller, but actually this is much bigger. I think this is even bigger than this in terms of the GMV. Okay, this is because here they don't book the total revenues or total items sold, right? They just book the revenue that they receive from the third-party sellers. So what happened here is that because Amazon let all these sellers to use their platforms, and then maybe I think in some cases, maybe in most cases, Amazon actually will do the fulfillment and so on. So they actually charge all these third-party sellers. And this is high-margin business. And aside from these two, right, I think these two make the bulk of it. And for your information, the number here is like 27 billion, 51 billion here. These are quarterly numbers. These are numbers. This is Q2 numbers. If you want to imagine what will be the annual figures looks like, you still have to multiply by 4. So aside from these two, I think there are still other considered large business. The one that I want to highlight is AWS. Just for a quarter, right, it's close to 20 billions of revenues coming from AWS, and their growth rate, just looking at this, is 33%. And then aside of this, there are still the rest, right? For example, advertising, subscription, and so on. So I don't think we will go through all of them, because if you just go through all of them, right, it's like a lot to talk about. So I think for the purpose of today's presentation, I will focus a lot more on the AWS. Okay, so again, for those who don't know AWS, right, Amazon Web Services, this is their cloud business. Okay, one way to look at to describe what is cloud business and what are they disrupting, right, is actually the IT business of like all sorts of companies. So before we have this cloud business, right, what companies do is that, for example, they might need to maintain their, let's say, even just website maintenance and so on, right? You have to have your own servers, in-house servers, right, in order to support that. So basically, companies need to spend on the hardware, and then they need to spend on their IT and so on, just to maintain the IT infrastructure, right, for their own companies. But once we have the cloud business, right, basically the value propositions coming from AWS is that every business, you should only focus on your core business. All these servers and so on, these are required, right? But actually, you don't have to do this, right? You should just pass on this IT infrastructure to Amazon. They will just actually become your, how to say, your suppliers. They will meet your demands when it comes to compute, storage, and so on. So what they want to do is all the business, they should actually, in terms of the IT infrastructure, they should just pass it to AWS, and then for them, they can just focus on their core business, right? One good example is Netflix, because I think Netflix, right, their business is, okay, they are a streaming business, right? So they actually spend money to acquire content, and then they have their own productions. But when it comes to delivery of those content, right, actually they don't have to maintain their own servers, right? So that's what they did. They actually have a very long-term partnership with AWS when it comes to the delivery of all this content. So basically, this is the business of AWS. So I think if you ask how many years AWS has been around, right? Actually, they have been around for 16 years already. The business started in 2006, and it was started by the current CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy. So he's the one, together with Jeff Bezos and their teams, right? They actually come up with this business model. And now I think since about 10 years ago, it has grown to a very big business. But given that it's already running for, 10 plus years, right? Are these considered mature business, right? So I think the first question, if you really looking into AWS, right, we want to ask what is the TAM, right? What is the total addressable market? So I just want to, when this record interview was released, right, I listened to Andy Jassy interview. He mentioned this line, but this line wasn't picked up by the interviewer and just skipped up. But this is what he mentioned actually. 90 to 95% of the global IT spend is on premises. So on premises, right, this is the opposite of cloud. Cloud basically it will be either Azure, Google Cloud platforms or AWS, right? So these are the cloud providers. For those companies that they have workloads and they don't use cloud, right? They use their own servers and so on, and they maintain their own servers. This is what we call the on-premises. So aside from these cloud and on-premises, there are some companies that they are using some form of hybrid. So that's also possible, depending on their own requirements, right? So basically, he's saying that 90 to 95%, right, of the global IT spend, right? So it's still on-premises. That means there are still a lot of business or a lot of workloads that is still not on the cloud, that is just waiting for either Azure or AWS to eat into this business. So I think there are, when you do some research on the on-premises versus cloud, right, it's not 100% cloud always better. But I would say, let's say 80% of the times is cloud is really better in terms of the scalability, in terms of the security and so on, right? So if they only, the total overall of AWS, the overall of cloud just take on 5 to 10%, right? That means the growth opportunity is huge. I think one thing, right, for those who are listening, right, one thing you can do is that you can look at the companies that you work at, right? If one day you have a chance to talk to your IT or talk to your friends, right, or anyone from the IT, you can just ask them, right, actually, just curious, right, your IT department or the IT infrastructure, right, are you guys actually using your own servers, or are you guys already for majority of the workloads already moved to cloud? And I strongly believe for most of the companies that you ask around, right, you will be it's just operating using the old way, which is that we still have servers and we still have our own IT people to maintain all the servers and so on, because they are still quite very majority of the companies still haven't really on board into cloud. So this is the reality. So although if you ask cloud is not talking about the cloud on the sky anymore. People know what is cloud. It's just that it takes time to actually move to clouds, because this is usually a very big business. And then I think this is another thing. Okay, this is not AWS, but for those we talk about TAM, right? So I think this is Jeff Bezos' answer when people challenge them in terms of the antitrust issues, right? So he basically said that only 1% of the 25 trillion global retail. So pay attention, it's global retail. He don't see Amazon as just the e-commerce, right? It doesn't matter if Amazon just take 90% of the e-commerce business. But if the e-commerce business is only 1% of total e-commerce, right, or total retails, right, that is not enough, right? Because for Jeff, right, their goal is actually for e-commerce to overtake the global physical retail, because e-commerce, once they really help you with the fulfillment and so on, you can just order and things delivered to your house, right? It's just much more convenient and a lot of selection and so on. So e-commerce is, in his eyes, right, is definitely better than physical stores. Hence, it doesn't make sense for e-commerce to stay small, right? So what he wants is for Amazon to grow big, right? So even if you just take away China and so on, you just look at US alone, right? In terms of the total retail, Amazon is only 4%. So I wouldn't be surprised, for example, Amazon in the future, this 4% become much bigger, right? It could become 20-30% of the total US retail, right? That means there's still a lot of room for Amazon to grow. So huge TAM. Then the next one I want to cover is competitions. So for competitions, right, I think we just need to look at this graphic, right? So AWS, because they are the one that invented the cloud, the entire cloud business, right? I think Microsoft Azure, right? They are really like growing very fast in terms of growth rate. They are higher than AWS, but in terms of the maturity, in terms of the dominance, right? I think AWS is still number one. So with like 34% of the total market shares, right? I think Google Cloud is trying their best to squeeze in, try to have like oligopoly situations, right? But I think the rest, right? Okay, Alibaba, this is mainly, I think, Chinese business. But let's say the rest, right? Like IBM and so on, Oracle, I think it's very hard for this business to compete with the big one. The main reason is because cloud business, right? How good can they provide their services really depends on the scale. Because the elasticity, right, meaning that for all the customer that they serve, right, it's not all of them need the compute like all the times, right? Sometimes there's spike in terms of their demand, right? So if they have a big business in terms of their cloud, right, they have all these servers around waiting to serve all these like sudden spike in terms of their demands, right? So they can fulfill all the customers' requirement easier. So I think for big one, AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, they will do well. I don't think AWS will continue to like maintain like even larger market shares, right? That's not my expectations, right? But I think these three bigger ones, they will be like dominance, but the smaller one will be harder to survive in the future. This is my expectations. But if you look at this 34%, right? Like, okay, this is the percentage. How big is this 34%, right? Like 34% of the total business, 200 billions. You multiply it, right? Just to give you a sense of how big it is. Just now we talked about the Amazon total revenue is about close to 500 billions, right? And Tesla is about 67 billions. And now don't talk about the e-commerce business, right? We just talk about the AWS, right? This is basically the amount. So it's about 70, I think it's about 70 billions. It's even just looking at AWS cloud business, right, is already like bigger than Tesla total revenues. This is inclusive of all the auto business, which is I think 80 or close to 90% in terms of their revenue, the energy and so on. You add it up all, it's still lesser than AWS alone. And this is revenue. If we look at the operating income of these two businesses, right, AWS is like almost like, I think it's about 2 times of Tesla operating income. Okay, this is how big it is. Okay, the next one, their growth rate, right? AWS quarterly revenue. You look at the growth, it's like just a clean exponential growth rate that is consistently about like 30. In the initial years, I think it's higher. It's like even 50 to 60%. Then here about 40%. And the most recent one, I think, is roughly about 30%. So this is like their past quarterly growth. And just for the sake of comparison, so Tesla quarterly revenue looks like this. This is, if you look at 2019 or before, this is before they scale out the Model 3. And once the Shanghai Gigafactory scale out, you can see that the steep of the growth rate is totally different, right? It used to be like lower growth rate in the past because they have all sorts of all these Gigafactory issues, right? And now you can see that they are really ramping up, right? So that's why the share price also like go up. Then operating income of AWS, a similar chart. And for Tesla operating income, you can see the initial years before they successfully scale up the Model 3, they are losing money. That's why the share price during this period is very weak. And then it's only after like 2020, after you can see that Shanghai Gigafactory worked so well, right? And they keep ramping up the cars and their revenue went up of like 50%. That's why the operating income also followed. And the Q2 numbers is a lot lower here because of the close down of the Shanghai Gigafactory. So I think the Q3 projection will be higher than Q2 just because of you can derive that from their number of cars that they sold during the quarters. Okay, this is the comparison of the operating margin. You can see that the operating margin of Amazon is like consistently higher, right? But Tesla is closing in with the successful scaling and so on. They're going up. So I believe these numbers, right, they could really closing in to be even above 20% as long as they can keep their average selling price, like the ASP. But for AWS, sorry, this is not total Amazon. This is AWS alone. It's like continue like profitable. That's why when people look at Amazon, they will just say their share price is so, how to say, the share price is growing just because of AWS, because this is the business that make a lot of money. The e-commerce is like really low margin business now. And this is the, okay, didn't plot clearly. This is their quarterly revenue. So you can see that just like I mentioned that their quarterly revenue, their revenues, right, is quite close to each other. And you look at in the past, right, you can say that, oh, Tesla is growing fast. How many percent they grew in the past, right? It's actually, when you look at this chart, they are, you know, like not able to exceed AWS. So this is just comparing AWS. We haven't even talked about the e-commerce yet. So I think this is just a comparison. I think we'll just go through some of the information that I when I did my research, I found quite interesting. So for those who haven't really paid attention to AWS or to Amazon in the past, right, just want to let you know that their business, right, when we talk about the business model, there's this word that keep on coming up, which is the flywheel effect. For e-commerce, I think it's easier to explain, because this is how it works, right? So they provide a very, very good customer experience, and then they drive all the traffic, meaning that people will go to Amazon to do their shopping. And then the traffic, right, because there's buyers there, it will attract more sellers, and more sellers will give the customer more selections, and more selection will push more flyers in, will actually encourage more buyers to go into their sites, right? So this is their growth flywheel. And because of the growth, right, the business scale up and up and up, right, then they can actually spread out the cost structure and lowering the cost structure. And by that, they can actually lower the prices and pass down the lower prices to the customer and make the customer happy. And that's drive more traffic. So throughout their foundations, throughout the companies that started out, I think, 2 decades ago, right? 2 or 3 decades ago, this flywheel has been continue, and that's why you see their growth. Now they have grown to like huge business, right? So this is how the e-commerce works. But if you look at the AWS, right? So I think there's still similar flywheel, but it's not like just purely like selection, discounting. I think this is not so applicable, but you will still see that, okay, because of their growth, they can lower the cost structure. I think this is still true. And then they keep on lowering the price. This is true for AWS. So it's not like they can, when they reduce the cost structure and then they just earn more profits, right? They keep on passing all the cost saving to their customer. That's why the customer, once they get into AWS, right, they don't get out anymore. They will rather just focus on their core business and let AWS to take care of all their workloads, right? So this is true, but the sellers part is and selection part. This is not so applicable for AWS, but at least what is applicable is the features, because AWS, right, clouds, right. This is not just like Amazon is the site that providing, and then the customer just consume, right? It's not just like that. So there are applications that's built on AWS. So it becomes essentially is just a platform, right? So their partners will be incentivized to build like apps or solutions on the platform, and basically they can serve the customers, the providers. So I think these are actually some of the flywheel at AWS as well. So this is very interesting. If you want to understand Amazon or AWS business, right, you really need to understand the flywheel. So this is the effect that Bezos talked a lot about. And then the other things, right, which I think is very interesting. This is also some points that was extracted from Andy Jassy when during the record interview. But all these points, right, when Jassy talked about it, it's just like come up from his mouth, right? But actually, these things is not new. This is actually explained by Jeff Bezos many years back. So this is how they assess whether to do M&A or decide whether they want to expand into a business line or not. So these are the questions that they ask. So the first one, whether the business line, for example, when they consider want to get into pharmacy business, when they consider want to get into streaming business, right? So all these questions, right, they first ask, like, could it be big enough? Because if it is just small business, small, like they cannot scale it up, right? So they won't do it because it doesn't like no impact to their business, right? It's too small, right? So it has to be big enough. And then they will ask, like, whether it's well served or not. Because if it is already well served, right, then they will just say, let the business do, right? If they can do it better, then they will enter. Then do they have a differentiated approach? So for example, like if you talk about just physical retail, there's a reason they don't get into the physical retails, right? Because it's harder for them to do, to offer a differentiated approach, right? So they are not going to do like the same business that Walmart or Costco doing, right? Because it's just the same business, nothing differentiating Amazon, right? But if they have a solution that's different, right, and it's better, right, that's when they will go in. Then the last one is that whether they have the confidence to build from scratch, and if not, right, can they just acquire it and start from companies that is already established and change it from there, right? So I think this is very interesting because you see all this, right? I think this should be the stuff that is taught in, let's say, like MBA, business school, right? But I think business school, I don't think they articulated it so well. I think this is what Jeff Bezos, he actually teach the entire Amazon team, like, this is how we look at things, right? So that's why when they don't get into all sorts of business, but when they get into it, right, it become a very scary things because they really like went through all these points and things that, okay, if they come and attack your business, right, it means that actually there's a lot of money to be made, and then the existing business is not serving their customer well. That's why Amazon are into that business to fight with you, right? And then they have a differentiated approach, and they really have confidence to really like like invade your territory. That's why that's what make Amazon really like a scary competitors. Yeah. Okay. Next one, I just want to briefly talk about like what are the, like, we can just show all the statistics, right? For example, like, okay, they have like 34% market share, their growth is so big. But if you don't understand their culture, what they have been offering to their customers and so on, right? It's very hard to understand, like, okay, why is it growing so fast, right? Is it just because no alternatives, or what was the reason, right? So I just want to briefly, I know there are a lot, so many words, right? I don't expect you to read all this, but I just want to let you know that all these details, right, this is actually shared by Amazon during their quarterly release, right? So they will put on in something like a memo format to give you like enough details. If you are interested, you want to read, you can read all this, right? So they actually communicated their progress in terms of their businesses quite in details. You can just read out, right? So this one, I just extract those from AWS alone. And then if you just look at what they have been doing, right? Okay. So they keep adding customers. So Delta Airlines, Riot Games, BT, Jeffries, and so on. Then you see, I don't know all these names, right? Some of them I actually don't know. I don't know how big are they, but my takeaway from here is that they are adding customers, and some of these customers are big customers, right? For example, you see Delta Air, Riot Games, these are not small businesses. Then what have they been doing, right? They keep adding features. So you can see that just in like in just one quarter, right, they have 200 products and services, like added 200 products. There's a lot of enhancement, innovations. I don't think these are like very, very big things. So they tend to be like small things here and there because they are teams, right? They work in, how to say, like in small teams, right? So all these teams, they keep rolling out like small features here and there. And all these features is really helpful for the customers that's already on AWS, right? So if you are already in there, like using AWS, you can tap into like different small apps here and there, and basically just use all these apps to help you to automate stuff, basically make your operations become more efficient. And all these things, right, all these products and services, if you are not on their platforms, right, I think there are still companies that actually, for example, they might sell you some software and so on. You need to license it, or you can pay for the software and then install and so on. It still can be done. It's just that I think Amazon, they are compete fiercely with all these other companies because when things build on the clouds, right, there's just a lot more benefits. So it's not just software. There are some hardware related improvements. For example, like they just released the Graviton 3. I think this is the ARM processors, right? And you see 40% improvement. I think basically what Amazon or AWS is doing here is that they design their chips and then they spend money in terms of their innovation and then pass all these innovations, right, or all these better products to the customers, but they don't sell it to the customers, right? They actually kind of rent it to the customers. And for those who are on the clouds, you can just tap on to all these servers, processors, or hard disk or storage and so on, right? Just for your needs. So I think all this is continuous. If you look at every quarters, right, they have a whole list of improvements. And I think this is also why Jeff, he keep mentioning that AWS, right, will always be a business that people don't understand, because it's not like they earn and then become a static business that you can just enjoy the earnings, right? Actually, they earn a lot, but they take all this earning and pour it back into the business and just make sure that they have the best customer experience to the customers, right? And what they want to do is not to have the best margin. So imagine that you keep on pouring back the monies in, right? Actually, you don't have much free cash flow. But what you have is that you will have a loyal customer, and all these customer, you imagine that 10 years down the road, right? Actually, the role of the IT business will become string, and basically most companies will run their IT on AWS. So then you can do your maths, like how much of the IT spend currently and how much is the IT spend in the future, and just assuming 20% of all this total spend move to AWS, right? How big is this, right? So even if they can just get like a small margin out of this, but this is big top lines, right? Still a very profitable business. Okay. Yeah, this is AWS talking about the features and so on. Okay, come back to the comparison again. I think this is why you guys are interested, right? So I just want to come back to the questions that just now in the beginning we asked, right? Like when we talk about okay, top line growth 7%, operating margin 3%, PE 108, sounds like a bad business, right? Who want to invest in this business? But once you break down Amazon and AWS, right, you can see that actually just compare these two, right? These two, the last two rows, right? Revenue, they are similar. When it comes to margin, currently, at least currently, right, they are 2 times of Tesla. Tesla, of course, this number is going to grow, assuming they can grow to, let's say, 25%, right? It's still lower than AWS, right? Growth rate for Tesla, this is Q2 numbers, so it looks a bit low. You can expect to be, let's say, 50%, assuming we don't get into a big recession, right? You can assume 50% for the next 2 or 3 years, doesn't matter. AWS is slightly lower, that's true, but you remember the chart, it looks like, there's one thing is the growth rate, right? The second thing that you should pay attention to is how stable it is, right? Because when your business and your value proposition, your proposition is to say that my offerings is cheaper, better, and faster, right? And got all tons of features, right? I mean, the growth rate is just much more certain. So that's why I would say, at least for the sake of comparison, I would say that even though the growth rate is lower, but they are much more certain as compared to Tesla. For Tesla, really need some view in terms of let's say if there's some recession, would people actually stop buying Tesla cars, right? I think this is the questions that you can debate about it. But for AWS, I think there's just no debates. In fact, when there's a recession, right, companies will think of how to cut costs And usually that cut cost means that they have to cut on their own IT spend and just move to the cloud, because cloud is just cheaper and better security, better scalability, and so on. So I think in terms of certainty, AWS is more certain. So if you just look at this, right, actually my argument is that just look at this number here. I would say just AWS alone, right, in terms of their valuation is quite, it will be like similar to Tesla already in terms of their how much you can like value the business, right? Just look at these two, right? I would say they are similar already. Growth rate, yes, AWS slightly slower, but offset by higher margins, right? And offset by better, like higher certainty, right? So that's my opinion. I mean, of course, those who are very bullish on Tesla, you might say that 40% is just too low. And if you can sustain like a 50% growth for 5 or 7 years, of course, the growth rate itself will actually make Tesla much more higher valuations. So I will agree with that. So there's a lot of dependence in terms of how much they can grow. For AWS, I think it's just a business that's much more certain. Then the question is, this part, right? The part that is look ugly, right? Actually, it's ugly because of this line, which is their retail business. Okay, so I mean, for the upcoming presentation, I will explain more like why these numbers look so bad, right? Okay, so the first one I want to explain is that all these things is because of the e-commerce and because of the cost problem. And why is it so? It's because of COVID, right? So I think during 2020, when, you know, all the shutdown happening and then physical stores has to shut down and a lot of all this retail actually moved to e-commerce, right? And Amazon realized that actually they can't fulfill all this demand. Okay, so they spend a lot of money in terms of their fulfillment, in terms of the labor and so on, just to make sure that, assuming that there's customer that they want to buy, right, they have to be able to fulfill all these demands. So come back to this flywheel again, right? So what they want to make sure is just that we have to make sure that the customer experience is there. We don't want that the customer, now they need to buy something, they log into the Amazon website, they place the order, and then the order just doesn't come, right? Because too much like demand, not enough people to deliver and so on. So that will hurt their customer experience. If that hurt the customer experience, right, there will be room for another e-commerce business to step in and actually to build their own flywheel, right? So this is just not, it's not going to happen. So what Amazon, because of all this COVID situation, they also don't know at that time, right, like whether all this increased demand is this like something that will sustain over the years, or will it be just a blip and just one-off event and later it will cool down, right? But for them, their decisions making is to say that, okay, if we are going to be wrong, right, we would rather be wrong and do too much in terms of their fulfilling the customer demands. They will just build, they will just hire and make sure that customer happy. Okay, if turn out that they built too much, right? So there's additional cost, they will just take it. Basically, that's what they have decided. The thing that they want to happen is that they just don't build enough and suddenly customer just go elsewhere and suddenly they have a bigger competitors to fight with, right? For example, like, you know, other competitors, even like Walmart, also they have their e-commerce offerings, right? So they don't want that to happen, right? And then, of course, now 2022, we all know that e-commerce, this is not like their growth rate already slowed down. It turned out that really this is just looks like a one-off, right? Because now it's not locked down anymore. People who run, there are people who move to e-commerce now, come back to physical stores, they enjoy all this shopping experience and so on. So the growth rate definitely slowed down. And once you hire so many people and then like you build all the fulfillment center and suddenly the demands is lesser than what you expected, right? Of course, that will turn out to be a cost problem, right? So that's why you see headline like this, right? So Amazon hit with 6 billion in costs, right? So these are the labor costs, warehouse, inefficiency. When they say inefficiency, what it means is that they build too much. Now there's all this warehouse, we don't need so much, right? So it doesn't look good in terms of their operating incomes. In terms of the labor, I think this is quite clear, right? You can see that in the past, they grow at this speed up until 2019 and COVID hit. suddenly from, let's say, 760,000 employees suddenly just jumped to 1.25 millions, right? And now it's about like 1.5 or 1.6 million employees. And bulk of these employees are those who work in the warehouse, maybe some delivery and so on. So they need to pay all these employees, right? So that's where all the costs came from. Again, comparison, right? How many employees Tesla has is about 100,000. Okay. So, and for Tesla, it's not like part of these are their engineers, their software, hardware engineers. It's not like that, right? They also have some, you know, like those who work in factories and so on, right? The mechanics and so on. So this is all of them, right? Like 100,000. If you compare their cost structure, right? This is the comparison, right? So Tesla is just like very, very small here, like 100,000 versus 1.5 millions. Okay. Then if you just like try to understand the earnings when we talk about like net income, not this one, this is operating income. But if you look at the net incomes, right, why their net income is so low to the extent that now they have a net loss, right? There's for Q2, there's also like one-off items, for example, the one-off item that's related to Rivian. So Rivian, because of, you know, the change of the accountings, so Amazon basically they own Rivian shares. If the shares price drop, right, they basically have to do some impairments, right? So this is what they call the pre-tax valuation loss. The loss is 3.9 billion just in one quarter alone. That's why Q2 numbers, they actually lost money. They lost 2 billions in just one quarter. Okay, so this is like, okay, if assuming that the share price is already, I mean, this is not operating side, I think the takeaway. Okay, because we shouldn't expect like every quarter the stakes, right, on Rivian will drop by 4 billions every quarter, right? It's not the case, right? This is one off, right? So whether this is like a positive number or negative numbers, you should really adjust it out from their income statement in order to assess the health of the business. Then what are the stuff that they are doing, right, to help with the margin situations, right? So what they are doing in recent 2 quarters is that first they are reducing their capacity, okay? So, and they make use of the assets that they have, right? So, you know, all this fulfillment center, logistic capability, all this investment that Amazon has done, right? They spend money to ramp up all this. This is basically their hard assets, right? So it is one form of their moat, actually. So when they want to compete with the others, now they have their own warehouses, own fulfillment centers, they have their own logistics. They don't have to rely on others, right? So they can provide better services or like experience to the customers. But when they have all these spaces, right, either they close it down or they can actually just, you know, for example, in warehouse case, they can rent it out to others, right? And just monetize it, right? So they also have been doing this to recoup some of the losses or help to generate some revenues. Then of course they are cutting their labor costs, right? So I mean in the recent quarters, I think they cut 100K employees. They didn't announce a layoff because for Amazon's, right, their turnover is very high, especially for those warehouse employees, right? So for example, like every quarter, let's say there's like, you know, new stuff that coming in and then people left and so on. So as long as you stop hiring or you're hiring less, right? So naturally the numbers of headcount will drop. So this is how they control the cost. So 100K, this is not small numbers, you know. For example, 100K, I don't know what's their average salary. Let's say if you just assume like average salary is 30,000 per year, right? Just take 30,000 per year, multiply by 100K. They can save like 3 billions already. You know, like couple of billions just come out by all this saving. Okay, so this is stuff that I will call this like a temporary headwinds that they are facing since beginning of the year, and they are doing a lot of things to help up with the situations. If you follow their Q1 and Q2 transcript and read the earnings call transcript, right, you can notice that there's improvement here. But the improvement is not like to say that okay, within 2 or 3 quarters all these are soft lah. So they need some time. It could drag until next year. It's not. I mean, we can expect that to happen. If there's recessions, this could drag on even further, and if even negative quarters for, let's say, 1 or 2 or 3 quarters, also possible, right? Yeah. So that's the headwind. The next one is that I also need to address, right? For this business, the e-commerce business, you can say that for AWS, even they are as profitable as Tesla, but still their valuation is higher, right? We need to justify that this e-commerce business is not like, they shouldn't worth zero, right? They should worth something. So what are the good stuff that's happening that to justify that the e-commerce business is actually profit making? Okay, the first one is actually Prime. So Prime, this is how they log in their customers. So I think for those who don't know, I think I would say that for those who living in Asia, maybe I myself, I'm not using Prime, but this is actually a big thing in US, right? So what Prime offers is that they offer all these like 1 day or 2 day delivery services, meaning that you just pay a fixed cost and then you can get like free delivery and so on, and you can access to all the Prime Music, Prime Video. Basically, this is like a big subscription offering that you just need to pay a fixed cost and you get all sorts of good things. And I think this is a very good business. The reason is because the expenses that is associated with a lot of all this Amazon, like for example, like delivery, or let's say take the streaming, for example, right? The cost, right, is actually fixed, okay? So basically, for example, the Lord of the Rings, they spend the cost to develop it, to generate all this content, right? The cost is fixed. But you can deliver more value to the customer if there are many people who actually subscribe to it, right? So now they have like 150 million Prime members in US. Globally, I think close to 200 millions. So imagine 200 millions pay a small number of money, small sum of money. They can actually like aggregate it, the monies, and they can have some like couple of billions, and you can pay it to acquire good contents, right? Basically, they just spread up the cost. So this is how the business model works, is that to build all this logistic network and so on is very costly. They need a scale, and how they generate all this scale is actually to have a membership, right? So they provide a very good value to the customer, make sure everyone is on board on this Prime, and then they provide the best experience, and in return, they take on this as a revenues, right? This is a huge revenue source for Amazon. So just to give you an example on the logistic front, right? So actually Amazon, they have their own planes. So they don't want to rely on too much on the third parties partners, right? So they have their own logistics. So in total, they have 88 fleets, right? This is the plane that they have. Okay, so if you look at the market share of US parcel volume, right? Actually, you see since in the past 2 years, actually Amazon is going up and up, FedEx is going down. So Amazon is really like, when it comes to all these hard assets investments, right? They are not saving money here and there just to squeeze out more profits, right? So they are actually build out a big fleet to serve their own needs. And then once they have excess capacity, right, they will just like help other people to fulfill, meaning they will monetize all these hard assets. Okay, so this is basically their goal when it comes to the Prime. So this is what Bezos said in 2016, so 6 years ago. So he said, our goal with Amazon Prime, right, make no mistake, is to make sure that if you are not a Prime member, you are being irresponsible. Means that he really want everyone to be on Prime. So, and then once everyone on it, you have a big scale, and then you basically just like spread out all these huge fixed costs, and everyone benefits, right? So yeah, so that's what behind Prime. Okay, talking about Prime, right? Let's look at how they increase their revenues, right? So I think this news was early of the year, February this year. They mentioned that they are going to increase the price, right, of the membership from 119 to 139. So just $20 increase, right? It sounds like nothing much, right? But if you just do the maths, right, global Prime members is 200 millions and US Prime members is about 157, right? So $20, everyone just pay $20 extra, right? You just multiply by number of Prime members, you suddenly get like 3 billion extra in a year. And you have to remember this 3 billions increase, right? There's no increase in cost at all. This 3 billions is like, like pure profit margin, it flows down all the way down to the bottom lines, and suddenly they have an additional 3 billions. And they can only enjoy this because they've been providing all the best, like customer experience to the customer. Basically, they just, like trap the customer into their platforms and don't go to competitors, basically. And once you are in there, right, and you cannot afford not to have a price, meaning that if you just stop the subscription, now every time you buy something from Amazon, you need to pay for the delivery and so on. It just doesn't make sense for you to unsubscribe from the Prime, right? So basically all this, they can just slowly increase. It's not like they want to profit a lot from this, right? This one is mainly to help them with the profit margin, because right now they are not making money because of increasing costs coming from the inflation and so on. So this is just to show you how strong they are in terms of their business. Then talking about the monetization, third-party sellers. So I think this one is a bit like they want to go after Shopify. So what happened is that, in the beginning, we talked about the e-commerce business. There are two types, right? One is that they actually buy from the suppliers and then they deliver it to the customers, right? The other one is actually they fulfill, they help, how to say, the third-party sellers. The third-party sellers, right, actually what happened is that you still need to log into Amazon website, but you can see other sellers. It's not from Amazon, one is from other third-party, but Amazon just help with the fulfillment, right? Then this one, it seems that this is the third one. This is actually for those business, right, that you don't even log into Amazon website. So basically, let's say you have a business and then you have your own website, right? So you can say, okay, now I have my own website. You want to buy something, say, for example, I sell my t-shirt. Then you buy from me and then I have to deliver it, right? So I think what they want to do here is that they want to attract these sellers who have their own website, they have their own channels and so on. You can actually tap into Prime, okay? And then they help you with the fulfillment, and then Prime members will also get to know to your sites, right? So I think that there's some synergy between these, meaning that they make use of their subscribers, right? And try to get some business from here. And this is also one form of the monetizations, right? Because once all these businesses, they use this buy with Prime features, right? Basically, they will use Amazon payment, they will use Amazon fulfillments, their logistic and so on. So this one also help them with the monetization as well. So all these are additional revenues that as of now, we still haven't seen it if you just look at the annual or the quarterly reports, because these are all new features that just came out recently. Then, of course, the last one that I want to talk about is the digital advertising. So I don't know, for those who don't know, for example, like Meta, right, or Facebook, right, after all the privacy changes from Apple, suddenly they just realized that, okay, their advertising business is in a deep problem because they have problem accessing to the customer data, right? So all this problem, Amazon does face this problem because you have to log into your Amazon in order to do your shopping. And once you do your shopping, they have all this data in terms of your preference, in terms of your search in e-commerce, right? So they have all sorts of all this data that they can monetize. And it's also quite easy, right? They just play around with the rank and put a label there that this is paid advertising. Then actually quite useful and quite helpful for whoever that want to advertise on the platforms, right? So this is becoming a big competitors in the digital advertising side. So I think this is one graphic that you can just pay attention to. 2019, Amazon, in terms of their share, right, is only 7.8%. Now it's already at 14.6%. This is slowly, you don't hear people talk about this because when we talk about Amazon, we always say, oh, this is e-commerce, and this is cloud business, right? People don't know that actually the advertising, which is like a high margin business, right, is actually going up and up, and it's already getting into this tripoly with Meta and also Google. So they are like going up, in terms of the market share. So, okay, all these things, right? I just want to say that what you are looking at is operating margin of negative 1.7%. if you just assume like believing like all these things that Amazon in terms of their e-commerce, right, they are increasing revenue, they are cutting their costs, and then like all these things, if they only need to improve this margin, it's not going to be 10% or 50%, to be honest. This is no margin business. Even the AWS, I also don't think over the long term it's going to be high. It could be even lower down, right? But this number, once it dropped, like they're able to like do all the things and improve it to like a long-term kind of like sustainable rate, right? They only need to target like a 5% margin, right? And 5% isn't much, right? 5% is just like retail. Commonly they can get a 5%, right? So if you just assume this is 5%, and even for now this is 400 billions, you just multiply, right? This one you can easily get a 20 billions operating income in a year. And how much PE you want to assign for this business, given that e-commerce in US alone, their share is only 4%. It could go up to 8% easily as long as they can provide the best customer experience, right? So as long as this number continues to go up, you multiply by a 5%, like a healthy or sustainable margin, right? This number currently should be about 20 billion, could go up to 40 billion, 50 billion, 60 billion in the future, right? Then you just assign a 20x PE, you can easily get a trillion valuation out of this. And this one also still growing at 33% steadily. You just multiply, let's say just take 20 billion, multiply by 30 PE. This is also about 60 to 70, 600 to 700 billion market valuation, easily going to grow to 1 trillion valuations. So added up together, to me, in my mind, right, although they are like 1.2 trillion market cap, I'm seeing them as a company that's worth, let's say 2 or 3 trillions in, let's say, 5 years' time, right? If not 5 years, it could be 7 years, doesn't really matter, right? But still, if you believe in terms of their culture, in terms of their strategy, in terms of their, their philosophy on how they run the business, right? And if you believe their TAM is big and sustainable, and they are able to compete and able to, maintain their market shares, right? So I think this is just a easy business to invest in. So I'm not saying that they are better than Tesla, because ultimately, when we look at tweets like this, right, the first thing that I want to say is that they are totally different business, right? So the moment that you start to do like comparison and draw analogy, right, I think you miss out the big picture. What we should do, right, is actually go into Tesla, go into Amazon, try to understand like their business, right? For example, like all these things, right, what they have and what's their philosophy, what's their strategy. Then you do a little bit of study in terms of their total addressable market and so on. You have a much better view when it comes to their current situation and how much you should value their business at, right? So basically that's the message that I want to deliver, and I hope that these sessions, right, is really helpful for you guys to like have a good understanding on this business. I'll just stop here and then let's proceed with a couple of Q&A. I think today's we don't have much time because of a lot of solo talking, but I'll just stop here just to see if there's any question from you all. Thank you for listening. I think you guys are very patient.
Can I share about what I think about Amazon?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I initially purchased Amazon entirely based upon their cloud business. In fact, I had my purchase with Microsoft because I knew cloud was growing at a very fast pace, and I knew that there's a gigantic moat between Amazon and Microsoft versus the rest. Maybe I should have also paired it with Google, but that was the entire basis of why I purchased, and it looks like thesis is bearing out. But I've come to a realization that maybe my thinking was a bit off. My thinking was that AWS would be the future of Amazon. Then after purchasing it, I did more research, and I just realized that the AWS portion is actually the engine in which Amazon can realize their vision. Amazon is actually very much like a startup. They are actually a startup with a rich sugar daddy, which is AWS. There's generating free cash flow of like what, gross margin of cloud is actually 60%. That means they do 70 billion and they generate 40 billion in this cash. That is how they get cash to actually operate Amazon e-commerce. But e-commerce is actually an anomaly. What they're trying to do is, I think the total addressable market is every single person on the earth, from cradle to grave, and even more than human beings, maybe even pets or livestock. So that is what they are trying to aim for. And that TM is, I think, unbeatable. And they are actually achieving it. So if you look at your graph of the Prime membership, you see 148, then you actually can see a curve downwards. Like, it's not really growing much, but that's without context. Because the fact of the matter is that there are only 125 million households in the US. And you have 148 million US Prime members. I mean, there are actually some households with 2 Prime members, which is a bit excessive, because actually you only need 1 Prime member per household. So they actually have achieved their aim of making sure that every US citizen, every US household is a Prime member. They already have reached that. Now the question is, will there be people in, I guess, Canada, Europe, parts of Asia, which they are strong in? They are also going to do the same thing. And the entire purpose of Prime is not just $140 per person per year. It's actually to collect data. Data to understand the needs of every individual. It's like a unique ID for every single individual or every single household. And they can time when you want to purchase stuff, what your buying habits are. They cut out the middleman. You no longer have to go to Sheng Siong to buy a bag of rice. Maybe they'll say that, oh, we can tell that you are running out of rice. Would you like it delivered to the doorstep instead of carrying 5 kg up to your apartment? They want to cut out the middleman. And that's going to be true throughout its entire history. So eliminate as much physical retail as possible, even though they are also in physical retail, by making sure that you get your goods before you actually want them. And that's why you can see the acquisitions they make. They acquire Ring. What's the purpose of Ring? Ring is actually a doorstep. So they have a vision of how your doorstep looks like, and they basically do last mile purchases straight to your doorstep using autonomous vehicles, as well as, I can imagine that maybe from the autonomous vehicles there come out a robot that actually delivers it to your doorstep to make sure that your goods don't get stolen. This is a much safer way than the current system whereby human beings deliver to the doorstep, and sometimes there are a lot of complaints regarding how they actually deliver it. So they also acquired Zoox. Zoox is actually a pretty sophisticated autonomous vehicle supplier. So, and of course, they have a high stake in Rivian. You can see the status they want to do. And of course, you know about the automation for their warehouses. I don't know how much of a percentage the cost of labor is in their finances, but if you can half it by making everything autonomous, I think that it's actually a big gross margin jump from where they are right now, because they are, negative for gross margin, I think, for e-commerce, which is why I said that they are a startup. They are running it at cost. Attract as much market share as possible, as much Prime membership as possible, grow the business commerce using the cash from the AWS. And I think that the size of growth is quite large, because they are very unlike your traditional e-commerce like Alibaba or Shopee. They are not a dropshipper. They are not a third-party reseller. They have that physical infrastructure, and they have a vision of operations to actually execute on that cost savings that they can deliver, unlike a physical retailer. That's why I think about them.
Yeah, thanks.
Also,
yeah.
I also think that there are more Prime members than car users in the world. So the TAM will be definitely larger than Tesla.
Yeah, thanks a lot, typical Singaporean. So yeah, I think you just now you mentioned about the cutting out the middlemen, right? I think this is very very true. They have been using this playbook for many years already. But these things which should be obvious to many of us, but sometimes I wonder like people don't pay enough attention now. Actually, what you can do to understand the removing the middlemen, right? Just looking at how they play or how they grab the entire book market shares, right? So Amazon, they started out as a book selling books, and then what happens is that they just, books is not just that everyone just come from publishers direct and then they do the fulfillment. It's not like that, right? They actually have all the distributors, and then at first Amazon get into the have a deal with the distributors, and then they notice that okay, actually people notice that Amazon is just the best place to buy books, right? Because of the selection, because you don't have to carry like heavy books, right? They just deliver it for you. So the user experience is so good that like majority of people buying books from Amazon, right? And what happened is that they know that this power or the once they remove the middleman, right? They actually have a lot of power in terms of determining the price. And then to squeeze the publisher and so on. And they do a lot of things that if you are the one that is, how to say, invaded by Amazon, you will really like fed up because they really make use of their power. But the thing is they are treating their customer very good. So that's the things, right? So depending on where you see Amazon, they could be like an evil and they could be like good friends, right? But from customer perspective, they are always the good guy because they fight for the lower prices and so on. So I think, like you said, they are just using what they are trying to do is just to use the same playbook and remove the middleman because there's a lot of profit margin in the middlemen if you submit all of them, right? So they just want to take all of those. And once you get rid of the middleman, you have all the data at your side. You become basically an aggregator. And that aggregator is always, the kind of position is very helpful in terms of like building the next things, whatever it is, right? So because they already have the data, they already have the customer on their side, right? So they can easily monetize it. The advertising is just the easy and obvious one. There are still many other ways for them to monetize all this.
I just like to ask some questions. So, okay, let's take into. I understand from business perspective, Amazon is great and everything, but let's just take into consideration. There's this issue which is that let's just do a forecast like by the next quarter or by the next biannual, right? By the next half year, would Amazon would the earnings report turn better or worse? Like what is the sentiment over here right now? Would it be turning better already, or is this recent one the worst already? How is the turning already? Like, is it pivoting already?
Yeah, I think pivoting already.
Pivoting already. Okay.
But not like a huge improvement. It will be slowly recovering.
Okay. Then the question over here is more of a timing thing. It can be a great business, and if the timing is wrong, then there's a lot of like opportunity cost loss by investing right now, right? In terms of that sense, where why not like during this period of like macroeconomic like instability, right? A more prudent approach would be that while you can still invest in Amazon and hold it and put it as like your long term, maybe perhaps 3, 4, 5 years bucket. But what about like the 1-2 year bucket, and like you think about like things that can actually drive growth faster in this near term 1-2 years? Would that be a better perspective to it instead of like just looking at a company that might grow to essentially take over the whole global commerce? Because there is still like a long period thing whereby there's still ample opportunity to get into it at some point later in time, when considering the current kind of situations that's going on right now. Yeah, things like, because it's definitely not going to be good going forward for like the next perhaps 6 months to a year, where the global economy is just slowing down to invest in like any of all these growth companies compared to like value companies that can actually generate cash flow upfront quickly for that 1-2 years. You could just get in, get those cash flows, and then get out at a reasonable rate, and then later on put into the growth companies kind of like perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, this one I do see your point about talking about like timings, right? So I think for those who are, it really depends on your time horizon, right? So for example, if you want to invest in a company, you say, I don't really care. I just want to invest in a company wholly for like 5, 10, 15 years, and companies that I don't have to worry about all these short-term headwinds. I just want to buy and hold, right? I think investing in your companies like Amazon, if you understand their philosophy, their long-term strategy, right? I think it's just I would say it's a very easy buy because all these things, if you just look at long-term, they are very, very certain. So it's like what are almost like nothing can go wrong, right? For example, e-commerce, how will it go wrong, right? Because the propositions is basically to say that now with e-commerce, you can buy it cheaper, you can get it delivered to you more convenient, faster. This kind of things is very hard to like resist, you know. That's why when there's one guy that asked Bezos this question, right? He asked like, okay, can you like tell me what will be different if we just look at 6 months, 1 year from now, right? So if you are looking at it from a market timing perspective, I don't really care long term. I care like 6 months later, are we in a deep recessions? Or 6 months later, is the Fed rate is already at 0%? Or could be the Fed fund rates go up to 7%, right? These are the things that will drive, 6 months kind of what will be, like the 6 month outlook. These are the things that is important if you are a trader, right? So, but Bezos' answers to that question is that, can you please don't ask me what will change, what is going to change, like in the near future, what is going to change? He said, you should ask me like, what will not change, right? Could it be like 6 months, 1 year, 10 years, 20 years? What will not change? So his answer to that is that things that will not change is that customers, they always want good experience. They always want fast. They always want the good stuff. They always want more convenience and so on, right? So these are the things that regardless of 10, 20, 30 years, it will not change. That's why they are spending a lot of money to really make sure that these things are taken care for. For example, they know that you want convenience. They don't want you, in order to buy one thing, so you need to walk, you need to go downstairs, take the lift to go and 7-Eleven to buy. Why not for that item to just magically come to your place, right? That's what they have been building in the past. And in the past, let's say in their initial years, they can't do a lot of all these tech things, right? It's also because you see they are not in a high margin business from the first place. It's not like Google's, right? Google in the initial phase, they already know that their advertising is very, very profitable. So they have money to spend on R&D and so on, right? But for Amazon, it's not like super profitable, and yet they are still passing all the earnings in the forms of lower prices to the customer. Then they don't have much money, and now they already have AWS that help them churning all this free cash flow that they can use the money, invest in the tech, provide the best experience, and basically get the flywheel running even faster, right? So that's the things, like, I agree with you. If you really just care about like 6 months, you need a catalyst, right? What will be the catalyst that makes these entire things different, right? If you're talking about catalyst, I will agree with you that Amazon is just not a good pick, right? Because like, even though like 200 new innovations that they just came up, right? New services, new products. Nobody talk about that, right? It's only those really their customers, which is like a small subset of those working in IT or developers. Like how many of your friends are developers, for example, right? Like out of 100 people, how many are developers? If you are not developers, including myself, right? You will find it quite hard to understand what are those things in like 200 new improvements they have done, right? So we just have no sense on like what are these things. But for them, it's that they don't care. They know that these are the things that customer want. They spend on it. They just build like really the long-term kind of culture is really like embedded into their how they run their business. That's why if you really, as long as you have like 10, 20 years kind of horizon, right, it is like a very easy kind of decisions to say, let's just invest. And I don't even care about their quarterly numbers, you know, because I know what they've been doing, like what's their philosophy. And when I listening to Andy Jassy, the interviews, right, feels to me it's like 100% Jeff Bezos, because they really believe this is the right way to run the business. The right way is not to like come up with something, make the quarterly numbers looks better and so on. This is not the things that they are doing. And that's why even their shareholders are those that really understand this is how they run it, you know. That's why you look at like 2 billion quarterly loss, right? 2 billion quarterly loss. I think, let's say, if this appear in other companies, right, the share price will definitely crash by, say, 70-80% kind of like drop. Right? You see, even NVIDIA also just revenue drop, right? Their earnings is still there, it's still positive. Imagine that NVIDIA just record a 2 billion quarterly loss, right? What will happen, right? So I think this is the things, if you are looking for short term, not a good idea. But for long term, this will be my picks. Yeah. So...
I don't think short term you should be investing in equities at this juncture. Really, in all equities, even value equities, just put into some safe, or as you always do, into energy, something that you know that it's going to pump up in 6 months.
Okay, then the next question would be that, so let's say given that everything is said and done, that Amazon is indeed a great business, how is their track record of treating their shareholders? Have they been good to their shareholders in terms of like protecting shareholders' value? That's the other question.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is much more complicated, because if you talk about like how they treated their shareholders, right? I guess, let's say if you compare against Apple, you will say that, okay, shareholders are the one that get all the benefits, right? Because they basically, for Apple, they generate a lot of all this free cash flow. They use it for the share buyback, and that's pushing up the share price, right? Basically, as a shareholders, you really get monies on your hand, right? But for Amazon, they really don't do this kind of things that much. I think they have done some share buyback, but it's also very small amount. Their business is generating cash. For example, the AWS is generating cash, right? They use a lot of all this cash for their own investment. They invest back to their logistic. They invest in a lot of the rings. They invest in the AWS. They invest in their servers, their hard assets, all these things. They put it back into their business, and actually cut off all the reliance to their, not all, cut off like some of the key partners' reliance, meaning that they don't have to count on FedEx to deliver their parcels within short period of time. They do it themselves. So they are doing this all this while. And if you just look at the cash flow, basically you don't see that. But if you look at the ROIC, right, I would say that it's still a very good ROIC. They have a very good track record in terms of that, how much they deploy back to their business and how much additional cash that they generated out of all these investments. If they don't do all these investment,
by how they treat the shareholders, you think about dividends and share buybacks only, right? If so, I mean,
only
pardon?
I don't think that should be the only metrics. The one thing that you look at is net and dividend, but you should look at how they reinvest also, right?
Yeah. So because I view them more as a startup than a company that is still growing quite fast. That's how I view them. And if I view them that way, I wouldn't want them to waste capital on share buybacks. I wouldn't want them to do that. I don't know about other shareholders. Maybe other shareholders want quick buybacks and quick dividends, but I don't think they've paid dividends. I think they only do buybacks. And they recently did 10 billion. 10 billion is, I think, underwhelming if you look at the scale of things, but it's still a buyback. But I would have rather them invest in the business.
Yeah, the thing is they have reinvest a lot, and you cannot see this number, how much they reinvest that clearly, because all this, much of this so-called the reinvestment is in the form of expenses. So for example, like they spend something for server, they still can capitalize it for a couple of years, right? I think they changed some accounting rules on the how many years to amortize it, right? For servers, you can still do that, but there's a lot of reinvestment in the forms of like, like software, like they hire software engineer, they do all this like improvement in AWS. I think these are all expense right away, so you don't see it like a line to say, oh, this is the reinvestment, right? You just see it like a cost. That's why the business looks like not profitable because of all these costs, but actually they are building for the futures, right? Okay, let's spend some time.
Are you all concerned that because of all these reinvestment and because of things having a longer horizon, right, they are also, in a sense, more impacted by like the macroeconomic winds that's blowing around? Because essentially, by putting things further apart, by putting things further into like a longer term horizon, whatever the government regulations are will more or less affect on to a larger degree, like how a business will operate, as compared to like a simple sales business that deal in like more like material inputs, right? That is easier to actually calculate for and account for, and like it's easier to pivot and change and stir a ship that is like simpler compared to like a giant behemoth like Amazon. Yeah, not saying that Amazon is a bad business. It's just saying that like it gets more risky in terms of like risk versus return, right? When something is big and requires a lot of like long-term execution.
Typical Singaporean, you want to answer this?
I don't understand what risk. Are you talking about policy risk? Political risk?
Risk in terms of like because Amazon is number one, is a global business, so there's also risk in terms of like geopolitical risk of things happening. The supply chain itself can be affected by how the geopolitics change. Its customer base can also be affected by that. Then there's also risk of like government regulations on like taxation changes on these areas, and then there's also like antitrust risks from like the EU or from like the US or China or whichever other countries that might want to do these kind of things. So then because of that, right, something like the total addressable market might actually decrease or stagnate over time, and that could also be an issue. Yeah.
So in terms of the risk factors, I believe that in terms of supply chain, of course, there's risk of bifurcation with regards to deglobalization of the world. But if any company would be affected in terms of e-commerce, actually Amazon will be affected the least because they are globally diversified in terms of their supply chain. So I actually have evaluated that the biggest risk is, of course, antitrust and union activities. Antitrust, of course, is that the big five, probably excluding Microsoft, is always in danger of being broken up into component parts. The risk is there, and you got to allow for that risk in your calculation. I don't think it's that large. I think that sufficient political capital for Amazon to continue as the business it is. Union activities, I think, is just impetus for them to move more faster into automation. And it only seems to impact because I got colleagues in other areas other than New York, and California, like Missouri, for example. And they're saying that Amazon, the workers there love Amazon. They love Amazon because they pay like 20% higher than what they would normally get. And after 4 years of working, free education. It's like being a veteran. So what we are hearing news from about union activities is mainly centered along New York and LA, I presume, and not the huge parts of the US where they are also have fulfillment centers in. So I think risk is there, but supply chain is not a big risk because it is globally diversified in terms of their supply chain. And some SKUs might not appear again if suppose they no longer have access to the market. But it's not. But I guess the larger one would be antitrust, and of course, short term there'll be unionization that will increase costs. This year it increased by 1 billion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
For the input.
Yeah, I think let me also comment on that, right? I think for Amazon, when you have like, although typical Singaporeans say that it is like a startup, but actually when you hire 1.5 million people, you can see that they are not a pure software tech companies, right? So they are really, it's a business that is based on hardware, all the infrastructure, including all the fulfillment center and all the logistics, all these are hardwares, right? So they are really operating in a real world. And these things, right, you are right to say that they are huge, harder to steer and so on. I think these are all true. It's just that the thing is, these are their core business, right? So if you don't believe that, you don't want to like expose to this type of like e-commerce core business, right, then I think this is not your investment already. But if you believe that this is their core business, right, which is e-commerce cloud business, right, all sorts of all these hard assets that they invested in, right, these are going to make their core business stronger, right? So you won't be too afraid of they need to steer away, like need to close down their e-commerce business, because they are just not going to do that, right? That is their core business. So that's why I would say that for any business that is like, if you believe their core business, that's number one. Number two is that as long as they are like really operating in a real world and not like a pure software, right? They will be subjected to all sorts of all these macro headwinds, for example, like recession and so on. It's very similar to Visa. Like, for example, you can say Visa, they have like very strong VC arm. They have very good, like their tax is very good. You can say all these good things about this company. But when recession comes, people spend less percentage times the amount spent, they facilitate less sales, right? Then their revenue also drop, right? So they can't escape from this. All the big companies that really operated in like like the retail or this real world business, right? They will have to suffer from the headwinds. So everyone suffers. Yeah. So that's my comment on that. So I would just speed up a little bit. Just want to answer as many questions as possible here. Hope you don't mind, because I need to close the call like right before 12:30. Okay. Where is Amazon growth going to come from? What are the major drivers of profits? Is e-commerce site stagnating? Is it value to value using PE or even PEG? I think these questions I've discussed during my presentations. I think the growth, right, it will come from the cloud business, and it will still come from the e-commerce, because both these two, right, in terms of the penetration, is still very low. So there's still huge room for them to grow. Okay, it's just that you need to be patient. It's not going to be like grow by 70% every year. Not that kind of high growth. I believe it should be around, let's say for retail, it will be, let's say, lower. But for cloud, it's still 30 to 40% kind of growth rate is still doable, right? Yeah. Major drivers of profit, this one also explained already. E-commerce stagnating, I think this one really depends on whether you are looking at short-term or long-term. For short-term, I would say that because of all this COVID, suddenly there's all this rush into e-commerce. Now people go back to normal life, right? So there are some adjustment there. So some normalizations. That's why you can see that e-commerce is like the demand is lesser than expectations, right? But over the long terms, right, this is not going to drop, right? So you just compare yourself, right? You just look at your own experience for items that you regularly just buy from e-commerce, right? It could be Amazon, it could be Shopee, or any other e-commerce, right? After you move to e-commerce, do you still enjoy go back to the physical store or not? This one, you just have to observe your own behavior to determine whether the e-commerce is the future or not. Yeah. Then the PE or PEG things, I think these are just very high. Like this is useful for like if you still want to do company to company comparison. I will against that. I will say that you need to understand in more details. For example, like even the earnings is that the earnings representative of their long-term earnings or not? Is that affected by their short-term headwinds? This kind of thing you really need to understand. Once you fix that, right, you still have to fix that. What's the percentage of their expenses actually is really for growth, right? That because of the accounting rules, they have to expense it right away. So basically, if you spend, for example, you spend 1 million to hire a software engineer can help you generate, let's say, 300,000 every year, right? So you will spend it, right? Because that gave you 30% ROIC. But if you just ramp this up, right, suddenly all this expense in terms of the salaries just hit your net income, you become like your earnings become so low, right? So, but you know that this is not going to be a problem long term because you know the ROIC. But sometimes if you just look at the income statement, it is not so obvious. So that's the difficult part if you are assessing all these companies that have huge reinvestment and deal with software, because software expenses, when you spend on like all these software engineers, their salary, you cannot capitalize it. So that's a problem though. Okay. Thoughts on Amazon physical store business. What do you think about the business synergy between the online and physical stores? So I think this physical store is also quite interesting, right? I think in the past, I think before they actually went into physical store, there are questions to ask Jeff Bezos whether they will go into physical store or not. And his answer is always no, right? So why no, right? Because they can't have a differentiated approach. Basically, if they get into physical store, they will just be another Walmart, another Costco, right? So they don't want to do that. But because of all the improvement in terms of the technology, now they can actually build like a physical store for people to just walk in, take the stuff that you want and just walk out, right? No need to queue to pay at the cashier, all these things. You can see that from customer user experience or customer experience, it's just totally different, right? I haven't tried it myself, but I just imagine it. I think it's quite magical if you just can walk in and walk out and everything just automatically charged to your bills, right? I think this is really like differentiated. And in terms of the synergy, of course, I think this one, even for, let's say, like Decathlon, right? Also, you can see that they try to build a small, not to build, they try to rent like small space, like throughout the Singapore. And then, let's say, if you buy some small parcel, you can just go to your nearest shop to get your items, right? I think there's, of course, some synergy. I think this is to address the last mile delivery, because if you can just pick up at the nearest store, it's always convenience, right? Because, for example, you're working and then on your way home, you can just drop by and take your stuff. And I think this is it helps with the cost, and then also there's some synergy there. But I don't think in the scale of Amazon business, I don't think this type of business synergy is like a big thing. To me, it's just like a small improvement here and there to help improve the customer experience. Okay. The next one, if you don't use PE ratio, what's your framework to look at the valuations, or does having high quality means you pay for any valuation? I think this is a bit like science and art. Of course, even though we say shouldn't focus too much on the PE, I think still we'll look at it, because I think PE, right, is just a very simplified kind of measure. What it says is that how much price you pay for a given dollar amount of earnings, right? So this is how we interpret it. Then, I think it's okay to look at PE. For example, you might say, we look at the PE of Meta, looks cheap now. I think this is fine to have this kind of comment. It's just that don't let the PE become like the end of your research, right? So you say, oh, I already researched the company. I researched Amazon. My research tell me that their PE is 108. Then I stop there, right? I think this is very bad. If you say this is how we look at PE, it should be a starting point, not the end, right? You should look at the PE and understand, okay, why the PE is 108? What is the market cap? What is their net income? What is in the net income that is one-off, and what are the sustainable one? How do we break down the numbers, right? How does the earning derive from? What is the margin? What's the revenue? Where the revenues comes from? What are their line of business? This kind of things, I think you should break it down. And once you break it down, then you have a much better, picture on the business. And then you can decide from there whether it makes sense to own or not, right? The last line on does having high quality means you pay for any valuation? I think this is definitely no, because regardless of how good is the business, if you pay at like crazy valuations, you will still end up with a very bad investment, right? So I don't agree that you should pay any price, but I should say the earnings on the assessment and so on, you should really really have a qualitative assessment as well. And then once you put in qualitative assessment, you will notice that everyone have their own opinions. Right? I think the best example is always Tesla, because Tesla, you can see that the board coming up, and then some people are bullish about the developments. Some people say this is a joke, right? So you can see when you have all these qualitative assessment, you look at the details, and then you have all sorts of different opinions. And from that different opinions, of course, people will come to different valuations, right? And if you look at the Amazon situation and you say that, to me, e-commerce is just like low margin. Cloud also, I think this is all like FUD, right? Not FUD, these are just like not sustainable, right? And you think that Amazon is not even innovative, right? And if that's your qualitative assessment, then you say not buying, right? I think that's totally fine, right? Yeah, but you shouldn't say that, PE 108, so bad investment. I think that one a bit like you're taking too much of a shortcut now. Yeah, so that's my opinion. Any thoughts on upcoming earnings season? Many misses and poor estimate forecast by companies. I think this one need to really be realistic, because like I mentioned quite a number of times in the past weeks, TCSS, right? Just triangulate different points, you can see that recession is coming. So things are slowing down. So that's the thing. When things are slowing down, most companies, their revenue growth will slow down. Okay. So even those with like very slow growth, they might drop to negative growth. Okay. So I think these are the things that we all should be prepared. We shouldn't be surprised. And likely there will be more misses compared to, let's say, last year. Okay. So last year it keep on like beating estimate, right? From last quarter till next 2, 3, 4 quarters, right? I believe that we will have more misses than like the big estimate now. But that's the things, right? Invest for the long term is you need to assess like this is the short term thing, right? Even 1 year, 2 years is still a short term thing, right? You still need to like assess like to what extent you are ready to deploy your monies. Could be a DCA, could be like if you don't do DCA, and how much the price has to drop. Like what's the level it has to drop to, then you have to invest, right? Because if you want to wait until the earnings all this start to beat, and then if there's any recession, now we go back to growth already, then only you buy, I think you will miss the good prices, right? Because I think the stock market will bottom before the economy recover. So I think if you look at the past, it's always like that, because stock markets, they tend to like, they are the leading indicators, If the stock market doesn't recover, it looks like the economy is going down further. So that's the thing. So stock market always act faster than the rest. So that's the thing that you need to know. But let's say if you don't have the appetite, right, you think that if it continue to drop, it add to your stress, and you say, let's take it slow, right? I think that's also fair, right? So different people, different way to approach these things. You just have to figure out your own approach. Last one, since we can't beat market and therefore buy ETF like CSPX, why would some people want to buy individual US stocks like Tesla, Amazon, Google, Microsoft? I think to say that we can't beat markets, right? It seems that you are saying that, everyone can't beat market. I think this is just like wrong, right? This is wrong statement. Because if you look at Okay, you just take away people who just passively invest passively, right? There are many people who invest in individual stocks, and you can look at 1 year track record, 3 year track record, 5 year track record, 10-year track record, and then you can look at number of people. It could be individual, it could be funds, it could be hedge funds, it could be, you just look at aggregate, right? The reality is that they are likely around 50% of the people who beat the markets, and the remaining 50% actually don't beat the market. Or maybe the ratio is not 50-50. Maybe the ratio could be like 30% of the people actually beat the market, 70% don't beat the market. But the 30% beat by much higher margins, because the winners tend to be concentrated in a couple of names, right? So there are people who can beat the markets. So I'll say that. It's just that if you don't know what you're doing and you just randomly shoot, right, it is likely that you can't beat the market because of the 30-70. By the way, the 30-70 is not the real statistics. I just made that up. But I have seen that before. It's really that there are some percentage of people who beat, but smaller than 50%. So the thing is, if you don't know what you are doing, it's rather that you just invest passively. You say, I don't know which one is going to outperform. I invest all of them to ensure that I will be capturing whichever companies that will do the best, right? So if you invest passively, you have exposure to all. Okay, so that's the things. Then the second thing is why some people who want to invest in individual stocks, those who invest in individual stocks, for sure they see something in these businesses, right? That they think that these businesses are better than average. Okay, if they are better than average and the CSPX is average, then I invest in these companies in hope that I can do better than CSPX, right? So that's basically the reason of someone want to buy individual stocks, right? And better doesn't mean the returns has to be higher, right? For example, for Amazon, if you want me to justify, or even Berkshire, right? If you want me to justify that these companies will have higher return than CSPX, sometimes I will say, I wouldn't make a very strong case to say Amazon sure better than CSPX, you know. But when it comes to the business assessment, and I might say I invest in them because to me they are safer. I understand the business that they're operating in. I understand their investment strategy. I know their strategy, right? I know their leadership. I have much more confidence on this company. I think they are safer, right, as compared to CSPX. Whereas for CSPX, because it is passive, you can see that passive means you have exposure to all companies, and there are quite a number of companies in CSPX that I think, right, they are going to be disrupted. And I think companies like Amazon will do well as compared to CSPX, right? So it's not just like, you know, there are companies that, for example, like they don't really innovate much, okay? Or they are in a sunset industry, okay? They might have a low PE, for example, like PE of 10, PE of 12, right? Looks cheap on the surface, but I know that these sectors, right, or this way of doing business, right, they are being disrupted for like a couple of years. They might stay relevant for maybe 3 more years and they will be gone, right? So there are many companies in CSPX that have this kind of characteristic. That's why I would rather to, you know, okay, I put some money in CSPX, but I also want some money to invest in companies that I believe that they have a much secure future as compared to like average companies now. Yeah. So basically, like I try to make a case, like to say why, for example, I myself invest in individual companies, right? But let's say if someone to say that I can't beat the market, I likely to do worse than the CSPX, right? To me, that's okay, right? Because I make my active decisions to overweight certain names. And if, let's say, take a 5-year, 10-year outlook and I did like underperform CSPX, right? So be it, right? So that means I don't have a good insights on the investment. I don't do better than the market. That's the risk that I'm taking. So I don't think there's anything wrong about it, right? So as long as I invest according to my philosophy, my outlook, right? And I'm happy with with the result regardless, right? So if it is turned out to be a bad investment, say for example, I invest in Amazon, suddenly it turned out like, okay, there are fundamentals deteriorating in the future and then they become irrelevant. Share price drop 50% in the next 10 years, right? So I lose tons of money, right? So I think so be it, right? So maybe I can learn something from this mistake also and then try to improve my investment knowledge or skill in the futures. So it will be a good learnings for me. So if it turned out well, I get the benefit. Turn out bad decisions, then just lose money. I think everyone who invests in any investments, right? That's basically your situations, right? You invest, make money means you make money. Lose money means you learn something. Okay, so that's my take on these questions. I think the topic on whether you should invest in passively or actively, I think this is very, how to say, it's your own preferred way of investing. But if you say you want to invest in passively, I think the number one benefit is that you basically don't need to spend time to do all this research, and you just ride with the broad market. And it could be companies that we don't know today, right? It could be a huge, big AI companies now at the VC state. Suddenly in 3 years, they IPO, and then in the next 20 years, they suddenly become the largest company in the world. If you just invest passively, as long as they are publicly listed, then you will get exposure. So you get the rewards with zero time putting into all this research, right? So that's the good thing about invest passively. You just ride with it, right? So I think that's also a good proposition, given that time is always the very precious commodities, right? Like we all don't have enough, right? So yeah, I would say that for those who don't enjoy study individual companies, I think just passively index, I think that's a good way to invest. Yeah, but for those who, like, I believe those who in this group and still listening live and have conversation, I think we are in the like, I would say, small subset of the total investor base that say, okay, actually I enjoy doing all this research. I enjoy looking at all these things, finding out Prime, how many members are they, looking at what Amazon is doing, try to look at their financial statement. There are people who really enjoy these kind of things. And for me, for example, these entire things, I spent yesterday almost an entire day just looking at all these things, just to come up with a story to tell, right? I hope that it is like you enjoy the sharing, but still like spending quite a lot of time, you know. So I don't think everyone like will enjoy this kind of research, right? So if not, just passive will do. Okay, we still have 15 participants here. I really appreciate your times, given that today is all like mostly just solo talk. And I really appreciate typical Singaporeans and also YCX here to have some exchange, right? And I know that typical Singaporeans also, I think it's the top positions, right? Amazon. So always glad to meet fellow shareholders and have some exchange. Can exchange some notes.
Actually, it's the second position because it's still.
What was the largest one?
Microsoft.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually quite similar for me as well. I think for me, suddenly Amazon become the biggest one. I think Microsoft is the second for me. So we have similar portfolio. All right, I have to stop here. Really enjoy a lot having conversation with you all. I will go out, so the recording will come up later. Okay. Thank you so much. I will close the call here. Thank you so much for your time and hope you enjoy today's sessions. Thank you.